Welcome back to the Soccer Fitness Podcast. This is episode 4. In today's episode, we're going to be speaking about how you can bounce back after being released by a club or you've been dropped by your coach or a team. So a few things we're going to cover in this. This is actually the third time I've recorded this podcast because there's been some corruption with the file. So if I sound like I've got a bit of a dry voice, that's why. But in terms of what we're going to cover, we're going to just talk about, firstly, normalising the experience of being released. Obviously, it's something which is really common, especially amongst youth footballers. So normalising that experience, also how to cope with the emotional hit that could come about when you get that news that you've been released or dropped by your coach. Separating opinion from ability. So remember that ultimately football is about opinions. A coach's view on you is just an opinion. It doesn't mean it's a fact. So separating that from your actual view of your ability, how to have an honest reflection on where you're currently at with your situation and how to the best sort of steps forward that you can take, and why it's important not to blame other people as well. Take ownership of the situation and just be really honest with yourself on what you need to work on. From there, we're going to look at identifying the actual gaps of the things how you highlight the things you need to work on from there. We're going to look at how you rebuild confidence as well, and then creating your comeback plan, how to use being released actually as fuel to then motivate yourself to come back as a better player, understanding the different pathways back into like elite level football, elite level club, if that's what you're aiming for. And then we're just going to cover also a few things on the biggest mistakes that players often make when they've been released, like the next steps, the things they do next. So we're going to cover some of those just so that you're aware of them, so you can try and avoid those and just have a structure in place of, if this does happen to you at any point, happens to many footballers. The vast majority of footballers have had a setback in terms of being released or not selected or benched by their coach. Every footballer experiences that at some point in their career, and I actually believe it's really a key part of a player's development is to be able to actually experience that, because it's going to develop a level of mental resilience and ability to cope with setbacks, which will then actually help you become a better player when you're playing first team as an adult player, wherever you ultimately end up. So those are the things that we're going to cover throughout the podcast episode. Now, I just wanted to go through a few examples first, just to demonstrate really how common this is. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is actually that players, when they get the news that they've been released, it's like they find it a real shock. Whereas I actually think, with it being such a big normal part of football and a player's journey, again, normalising it and ahead of time, thinking about how you would react to that situation. Obviously, you're going to do everything you can to try and avoid that, but how you would react if it did happen in terms of the next steps you would take so that it's not going to have a huge impact on you and you can bounce back as a better player. So some examples of players who have experienced setbacks. So the first one, and I've got all of this information from the internet, from Google. So if you think any of these details aren't correct, please comment below and let me know. But as to the best of my knowledge, this is all accurate. So Harry Kane, first player, apparently was rejected by Arsenal when he was 8 years old for not being athletic enough. He was then also released by Tottenham's academy, and then he re-signed. So he returns to Tottenham when he was 11. But even then, between when he was 11 and got to the first team, multiple times he was put out on loan to different clubs because he was told that he wasn't ready yet for that level. Second player is Marcus Rashford. So apparently he was nearly dropped by Man United's academy when he was in their youth system because of his late physical development. But they kept him on because they kind of believed that he would catch up physically. And obviously, technically, he was there, so they kept him on. Jamie Vardy is another classic example, which you might have heard of. So Jamie Vardy was released by Sheffield Wednesday when he was 16 for being too small. He then played non-league up until his early 20s. And then he went on, obviously, to win the Premier League, play in the Premier League and be a Golden Boot winner in the Premier League as well, and play for England after all of that. Next example, Virgil van Dijk. So he was considered not good enough and too small when he was at Willem II's academy, and he nearly quit football after being overlooked. And obviously now he's become known as one of the world's best centre-backs, playing for Liverpool and the Netherlands as well. Mo Salah is another one. So apparently rejected by multiple clubs in Egypt for being too skinny when he was a younger player. Excuse me. Kevin De Bruyne, released by Genk as a kid for being too quiet and not physically developed enough. He later re-signed when he had gone through some physical development. Trent Alexander-Arnold, nearly released when he was 15 due to his size and physicality, but Liverpool kept him on because they believed he would grow into his body. Andy Robertson, another classic example, released by Celtic when he was 15 because he was too small and physically behind. And then ultimately, obviously now he plays for Liverpool and Scotland. Start to notice a theme here of the reasons players are being let go. Riyad Mahrez, rejected by multiple academies in France for being too small. Didn't get his first full-time academy team until he was 18. Mbappe apparently trained with Chelsea a few times as a kid and wasn't signed on because he was told he wasn't strong enough. Luka Modric was told he was rejected as a youth player by Hajduk Split, if I pronounced that correctly, probably not, for being too small and, gone on to play for Real Madrid, win Champions League, Ballon d'Or winner. He's had an incredible career. So just some examples there of players who have played at the highest level who you would consider world-class players who all had setbacks as youth players. Just to normalise that, and you see, even though they might be released by one club, it doesn't mean it was the end of their journey. The important thing was to keep going, not give up, and get into a different environment or just wait for things to change. And they've ended up ultimately becoming pros. A lot of the time, these players are becoming pros at different clubs to the ones they were originally with, and that's how they've got their first team, made their first team debut. To give you a couple of examples of some data around that I've got. Okay, so only around 1 in 6 players signed at 9 will still be at the same academy by age 18. And in terms of the Premier League, less than 1% of academy players will ever make a Premier League appearance. Some studies make that say it's 0.5% to 0.7%. But of that 1%, that's not all players who are going to travel all the way up through the youth system of the same club and got into the first team necessarily. There'll be players in there who've started at one team, been released or switched to another team, and then they made their debut with that team. So again, it's not always a sort of straightforward journey. But as we know, the amount of players that actually become professional in the grand scheme of things is a very, very small percentage of players. So you need to be realistic about, it is a big challenge and you need to be doing everything that you can to maximize your chances. But being released or being dropped or being benched, things which are completely normal and you should expect to experience some point along that journey. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to experience that. You can do everything you can for that not to happen, but sometimes it can actually happen and do you a favour. And I'll explain why in a few minutes as we work our way through. So the first thing to cover is just normalising the experience. And like we've already covered, it's really common to be released or dropped in youth football. And even top pros have been released at some point. And it's important to remember that being released isn't a verdict on your long-term potential. So just because you're released when you're 12, 13, 14, for reasons, it might be due to physicality, it might be because your technical ability, it might be because you haven't got the right tactical knowledge. There might just be other players in the years above you who are slightly stronger at that club, so that the coach doesn't think that you're going to take one of those players' places. Yeah, it doesn't dictate the ceiling of where you're going to get to in your playing career. In terms of managing the emotional hit of being released, so a lot of players it will come as a bit of a shock and they won't be expecting it. And that's the emotional hit comes in a number of ways. So one is obviously the shock of that happening if they're not necessarily expecting it, but normally players they'd be given a bit of a heads up or told, you need to be working on these things, otherwise we might not be able to retain you. The next thing is embarrassment. So some players will have friends, and amongst their friends, they're just known as the player who plays at a pro club, and their identity is quite strongly tied to that. So it can be tough when if they've been released, to actually admitting that to friends, and there's a level of embarrassment with that, because other people aren't going to be thinking about it and having the context of the situation, and they're not going to be thinking about it at such a deep level. So there's embarrassment that comes, maybe a bit of anger if you feel that you've been treated unfairly. If another player you feel that you're better than or stronger than has been kept on and you've been released, there might be maybe a bit of anger around there as well. Disappointment, obviously, and all of these emotions are completely normal. The important thing is to respond to that situation without letting your emotions dictate your next decisions. Okay, and so in terms of that, not letting your emotions dictate your decisions, I'm going to go through a framework in a couple of minutes where you can actually analyze how you're going to improve yourself as a player and pinpoint the things which are going to help you come back and maximize your chances of getting to that level again, or even a higher level. So just moving on to separating opinion from ability. So like I said, football is a game of opinions. One coach's opinion isn't the truth about your ceiling as a player, and players get released for all sorts of reasons, and they often have nothing to do with talent, like we've already covered. A lot of those players who have reached the top level now that we just listed, they weren't released for anything to do with their technical ability. It was their physicality, so they're not strong enough, not big enough. So those are the areas they got released for. So it makes sense then, it wouldn't make sense to give up at that point, because your physicality is going to progress as you grow, but also there are things you can do that are within your control, the strength and conditioning training, which can help you become stronger right now. So if you work on those things, maybe you were neglecting them before, or you just weren't aware that you could work on those things at a young age, then you could start doing that and come back a better player in a relatively short space of time as well. And if you like any guidance of that, I've added the link below this video to the Elite Football Athlete Program. That's the program I run. It runs fully online. It's online. It's a strength and conditioning program for youth footballers between the ages of 9 and 18. We commonly work with players who are trying to get into pro academies, or they've had a trial and they've not been signed because they've been told they're not fit enough, strong enough, fast enough, or they're at pro academies and they're trying to get an extra edge to make sure that they get retained, or they're doing well and they're trying to make international selection. So we cover all of those situations there. But yeah, so just to be aware that a lot of the time being released is nothing to do with your technical ability. It can be something completely separate to that you can work on. So just in terms of reflecting on your situation then, there are 4 areas which we can go through to help identify what we need to work on. So we've got your technical game, your tactical game, your physical game, and your psychological game. Okay, so there's 4 areas there that you can go through and think, okay, maybe technically I'm at the level, physically I'm at the level, psychologically I feel pretty confident, and I don't think that's holding me back, but my football IQ and my tactical knowledge is the thing which is holding me back. So just from doing that quick exercise, that's the thing I need to go in and focus on. Study my position more. Maybe you need to become a player who can play in more than one position, so you're more adaptable. And that might be a reason you get released, because there's another player who's just as good, but they can play multiple positions. They've got an edge over you. So maybe it's just that, or maybe you've got a great football IQ, but the physicality just isn't there, which is extremely common, as we've covered. And you need to work on the strength and conditioning side to get your physicality up, and then you can compete with these bigger players, and that's not going to hold you back anymore. So go through each of those 4 sections, just listing some things that you could potentially work on where there's a bit of a gap right now, okay? And you want to work on things which are within your control. So not focusing on things which are outside of your control, not making excuses as to why you've been released, like, oh, that player's just the coach's favourite, or they've been there for longer, or is the coach's son. Don't make excuses, look for reasons and explanations as to why you might not have made the cut. And so you've got some actionable things you can take ownership of and start working on straight away. Now, with identifying the actual gap and the things to work on, remember that if you are released or dropped, it's not that you're not good enough overall a lot of the time, most of the time. It's just that you're not ready yet. So like with Harry Kane, he was released because he wasn't athletic enough. It doesn't mean he wasn't a good enough footballer. He just wasn't ready yet for that specific scenario. So he had to go away, put some work in, and then eventually he was at a level where he was ready to be in the Tottenham first team. Okay, so it might be that you need to work on your strength, your speed, your stamina, your confidence, which is strongly related to physicality as well. So when players don't feel like they can physically compete, that often has a big knock-on effect to their confidence. But when they do feel like physically they've progressed, they're stronger, fitter, faster, they can handle any opponent they come up against, they can have the level of impact they want to on the pitch at a higher intensity. That has a big knock-on effect to their confidence levels as well. It could be decision making that you need to work on, consistency. Now with consistency, if you're a player who's sometimes there's a 10 out of 10, but then another week you're a 5 out of 10 and it's a bit up and down and coaches don't really know what they're going to get from you, you're not going to be as highly desirable a player as someone else who's more consistent, where the coach knows what they're going to get week in, week out. So to be more consistent, I believe that what's needed is a full structure behind what you're doing with the team. So that's what we provide as well. So with that structure of the strength conditioning that we provide, the player is going to have all of their physical development sessions that they can do from home each week, working on those, and they're going to be progressing each week in terms of their strength, their speed, their stamina, their injury resilience, their mobility, their flexibility, and they're getting these small wins every single week away from their team, and that's going to help build their confidence. So even if you're not having a great time with your team, what you've got set up with your own personal training, that could even be working, developing your own technical game, working on the side with a technical coach one-to-one as well. If you're working on these things outside of your team sessions, you can get these weekly wins just by yourself, which will start to increase your confidence. And then you can take that into your match as well and your training sessions to increase your level of performance and be more consistent with that. Also, what we cover is helping with players with what they do before a match and after a match in terms of mental preparation and analysing performances as well. So they know what to work on, what to focus their mind on in the match, and how to reflect on a performance as well in a structured way. And then they can keep building week on week when they do that work. And that framework being inserted in there really aids the consistency. So yeah, those are the things that are covered in terms of identifying what is the actual gap and the things you need to work on. In terms of rebuilding confidence as well, it's important that you actually take action on things. That's what's going to help your confidence. So I don't think you can just think your way to being more confident and just think, oh, I'm gonna hope I feel more confident in the next game. Things like visualization will take you so far, but if you are not strong enough, visualization is not really going to help you. You need to actually take action and start developing your strength by doing some resistance-based training, so that then you can step back into that elite environment and feel more confident and know that you're actually stronger. So you're going to take action, and then the confidence is going to come from that action, not just hoping things are going to improve. And just lastly on that, with the confidence side, just going to have a quick sip. I think this is something most players do, but it's really important to try not to compare yourself with other players. They say that comparison is the thief of joy, don't they? So if you, for example, have another player who you feel that you're just as good at your club, you've been released and they haven't, you might start to wonder why. You might just think, well, I'm obviously just not as good a player as them. But there's, for each player, individual context. So first of all, they might be playing a completely different position to you. So it's a different situation altogether. They might have a different style of play. They might have less competition for that position as well. Also, they might have players in the year above or a couple of years above who aren't as strong, and the coach may feel that they might actually be challenging for one of their places and could take one of their places, so it makes sense to keep them on. Whereas you, ahead of you in the years above, you might have some extremely strong players who are going to be a real challenge, and they think that it's unlikely that you're going to be able to take one of those players' places, so it's best for you to be released and go and find a new environment. So like I say, sometimes it can actually work in your favour. If you're not enjoying your football in a certain environment and your chances are going to be limited, your progress is going to be limited anyway. So sometimes it might actually be better to get out of that environment, get into a new environment, and then with a coach that obviously has a different opinion on you, and then you might potentially have a different scenario where you've got different opportunities, and you might actually progress further. So instead of staying at one club where there's kind of like a glass ceiling above you, getting into a new environment might actually help you prosper more. Okay, now in terms of your comeback plan, here's how I'd go about that. So I would set out a 12-month goal, and with that goal, it doesn't have to be something which feels realistic right now. It can seem like a little bit, a little bit crazy, a little bit out of reach right now, not very realistic. But it doesn't matter. That's your 12-month goal. We can either do like a 2-year goal, and then you're going to work backwards from that, and that's going to set out your other goals. But also, that goal which feels unrealistic now is going to give you motivation to put the work in. So then we're going to set ourselves a 3-month goal, and that's something you can actually take action on now. And you're going to start to see quite quick improvements on that work, so that by the 3-month mark, you've made real progress. Then from there, you're going to set another 3-month goal and layer this up to get closer to that 12-month goal. So even if you don't achieve the 12-month one, you're going to get a lot closer to it by working backwards and having something which motivates you and is going to stretch you. With each of those 3-month goals, they shouldn't be something which are too easy to attain. You should feel that they're realistic, but they're also stretching you a bit. So you're having to really, put the work in to try and stretch your performance to get to that goal. And again, even if you just fall short, you're going to get further than if you don't have a goal at all. So that's how I go about with the goal setting, and then having a weekly structure in place which supports that, which is progressing you towards each of those goals. So each week you're building on what you've done in the week before, and it's preparing you for what's to come in the next week. Okay. It's also about training smarter and not just training harder. So what you want to try and avoid is, if you're really frustrated in a situation where you've been dropped or released, just trying to train as much as possible and you actually start overtraining, just trying to do everything. Much better to have a structure in place, because then you can see what you're going to focus on each week. You can see you've got a recovery in there as well. You're not going to be going around in circles. Also, that's going to reduce the stress of the situation, help you focus and just relax and actually enjoy your training more, because you're not trying to chase opportunities now and getting stressed about that. You're actually maximizing, doing what you can, what's within your control, to then hopefully you can attract opportunities to you. You never know where there's going to be a scout or a coach watching. So if you just make sure that you're always doing what you can to be as ready as possible, that's essentially all you can do. And then, what will happen from there. Okay, so just in terms of, we've already covered being released. That could be actually a turning point for you if you handle it well enough and have this sort of structure that you work through. So you can use that as a fuel to help you come back as a better player. Also, like I've covered, it'll help build that mental resilience. If you get all the way to being a first team professional player, for example, and you've very rarely experienced any setbacks, and then you suddenly do, and you haven't had practice at handling those, there's a chance that it's going to be a shock to you and your performance level is going to dip, as opposed to if you experience setbacks on your journey throughout the way, which helps with your development. And then by the time you get to becoming a first team pro, you've dealt with so many setbacks, you've built such a level of mental resilience that you're able to keep just a nice cool head throughout that journey. So you're not getting overexcited when things are going well, but also, things aren't devastating when they don't go well. You're keeping a nice, even mindset, where you're just, making your way through these different challenges, these ups and downs that you experience as a footballer, and navigating those. And like I said, I think a big part of that is actually expecting them to come about as well. It's highly unusual that a player is not going to experience setbacks. So if you expect them in advance and think, if that does happen, how would I react in that situation to make the best of it? Then that's going to help you, I think, in that situation, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to what are your ways back into like an elite level pathway? Remember that if you're released, it doesn't mean it's the end of your pathway. It just means that it's like a sidestep, an opportunity to get better, an opportunity to identify the things you need to work on. Maybe it gives you a bit of a kick up the backside because you haven't been working hard enough, and it's a reality check of what is required to become one of the best players for your age group and get to the, playing at an elite level. So in terms of the different routes you could take, you could obviously go back into grassroots, get your confidence back, be playing every game, and then you never know who's watching from there. You could also go into some representative squads. So for example, if you're get selected for your county team or your regional team, that's another route back in. You never know who's watching those matches. ID camps, so if clubs have trial days that you can attend and put yourself forwards for, putting yourself forwards for those and not being scared of being rejected again and not going for it. Put yourself forward, go for it. Even if you don't get selected, it's a chance for more feedback, more exposure to different, playing against different levels in different environments. So it's all things you can learn from, and just making sure that you're putting yourself on show as much as you possibly can. And then also development centres. So if you can get yourself into a development centre, lots of clubs have those. So there'll be, the club can then watch you over time and then potentially select you to go and train with the proper squad for your age group. So that's another route in as well. Finally, obviously, we've got the strength and conditioning work, for example, that you can do outside of your team training sessions. And if you're working with a technical coach as well, just to make sure you're working on the things that you know you need to work on, maintaining certain standards and intensity in your training, so you can, if your opportunity comes about, you can go back into that elite environment as seamlessly as you possibly can. Okay, so those are some options there. And then just to look at some of the biggest mistakes, just to round off. Biggest mistakes players make after being released. So one is trying to train too much out of panic. So like I've already covered, just trying to train everything every single day and hope that that's actually going to make a difference. Much better to have a clear plan and structure in place, which just removes all that stress and allows you to have enough downtime and recovery time in there as well, because that's really important. Ignoring your physical development, like you said, that's one of the key things which stops players reaching their full playing potential. Comparing yourself to others, like we've already covered, rushing into the next opportunity without fixing the gaps. So if you get released by a club and then you just, without fixing the things and going through this process of getting feedback and identifying what you actually need to work on, if you just keep playing football but not addressing the things which are responsible for you being released in the first place, and then go back into an elite environment with a trial and you haven't worked on these things, there's a high chance you're going to get released or not signed for the same reasons again. So making sure that you actually spend the time to address these things before going back in, and actually take the time to identify these things. So that's essentially everything I was going to cover with that. Now I want to give you just to finish off, some of my own examples. Again, just to demonstrate from my own personal experience how I've seen this play out. The first one is that, I'll add a link below this video to my story, so you can go through my journey as a player and then into becoming a coach as well. But I was with Wycombe Wanderers for 9 years, from the age of 9 to 18. So that, if you're not aware, that's a pro club here in England. So that squad that I was in, there actually were some really decent players that I was with for probably 3 or 4 years at the start. And they were really good players, normally midfielders, but they were quite small, but technically brilliant. And after about 4 years, they suddenly just got released. And I found that quite a shock, because they were quality players, but it was the physical side that was the reason that they got let go. There were no other reasons around that. So that's one way that I've seen that play out personally. I always saw players who came into trial with our team, good technically, but if they couldn't keep up physically, the intensity, the strength from the ball, they were the most common reasons they didn't then eventually get signed. So remember, if you get an opportunity, you've got to be better than a player who's in your position, who's already in the pro club setup. So you've got to turn up, ready to hit the floor running. So really, you need to be making sure that you're at a higher level than a lot of these players, ready to take their position and being aggressive about that. Another thing that I saw is I've seen a player who, again, I was playing with him for about 5 years, and then I think he was released when he was about 14. He had injury issues, but was also a bit on the small side as well. Not the most explosive player either. He actually went on to score the winner in a playoff final at Wembley a few years ago. So just one example there, released for being too small, too many injuries, didn't give up, kept going, found some different clubs. His journey took him to that point in time as well. Another player who is actually the year group below me, who I can remember a lot of the time, he wasn't a starter, he was on the bench quite a lot, didn't really have a main lockdown position. And then when he kind of hit the age of 16, 17, he started to get more of a starting spot. He developed physically, so he developed this explosive speed, found himself then in the first team, went on to sign for a Premier League club and also play internationally as well. For Scotland, so that was another player there. So as a youth player, often on the bench, not a starter, and then eventually, found his way. Another player I can think of. So I had a period of 4 years where I was out injured, and then when I was able to make a comeback to playing, I played in the NPL in Australia. So I played with a player there who I think he was 19 at the time. To the best of my knowledge, had never been with a pro club. I think he had played for Australia schoolboys, but he was already 19, not with a pro club, so a lot of people would probably write a player off at that point. But first of all, he had a mindset that he was, he wasn't going to give up. He was going to make it. He actually then went to sign with a professional club in Scotland, and then QPR in England, and then play for Scotland as well, Scotland national team. He played in the Euros. So I think that was within the space of 3 years, probably, from being 19, playing in Australia in the NPL, to representing Scotland at the Euros, to show you like a crazy journey that can happen. A lot of these things people just can't expect. So one of the key messages actually is that don't let someone tell you what your possibilities are. If you're willing to put the work in, and you're serious about it, and you're realistic about what's required in terms of the work and your competition, then you never know where these things, where football can take you. Final player is when I was with England schoolboys, under 18s. It's actually my centre-back partner. Again, I think he'd only been with a pro club for a maximum of a few weeks. Up until that point, he was already 18, but he was extremely fit and good physicality as well. He used his body really well. I believe he was like a black belt in judo, which really helped him with using his body. Very hard to knock off the ball, very fast, very calm as well, but technically no better than the other players at the same level, I would say. So from there, he went on to sign for Fulham. He then signed for Man United. He played, he won the Premier League, Champions League, played for England, and played in the Euros and the World Cup as well. So that was probably a space of, again, 3 or 4 years, going from English schoolboys, under 18s, never been with a pro club, to playing for Man United. So this is just from like one person's experience, my experience of my playing career throughout my youth years. So imagine all the examples that must be out there of all the players who've had similar things happen to them like this. So there's no reason why one of those players couldn't be you. Obviously, the chances are slim, but all you can do really is just try and maximise what you've got, give it your best shot, and then you've put everything into it. And what will happen on the back of that. But I believe that you create your own luck and you attract these things to you. And that's certainly what I've seen with that player who I played in Australia with. He had a really strong mindset of, I'm gonna be a pro, even though at the time there weren't really many opportunities for him, as far as I was aware. And again, at that level, he didn't particularly stand out. Decent player, but didn't stand out like by a mile by any stretch of the imagination. So just a few examples there from my playing days. If you'd like to read more about my story, click the link I've added below this video. Also, the Elite Football Athlete Programme, so we cover all the strength and conditioning side for youth footballers. It's all run fully online, designed to be followed from home, because a lot of players, they can't go and see an S&C coach multiple times in person per week, which is what's required to make real progress with this type of training. So if you'd like to work with me and my team, details are below this video. I've also added a link to my book that I've written called The Football Fitness Bible. You can find a copy of that link below this as well. There's a digital version and also a copy on Amazon, which is available to purchase. And if you'd like to go deeper with any of the strength and conditioning side. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you got some value from that. Maybe this has come just at the right time for you if you're going through a tricky situation and you are struggling in terms of the emotional side, feeling a bit of shock, embarrassment, anger, disappointment. Obviously, you're lacking motivation. You're wondering whether you should continue, just hang your boots up, or what to do next. Hopefully, this gives you some structure in a way that you can reflect on this and move forwards from there. So yeah, thanks so much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.